Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome back to the Luminary podcast. I am your host, Annie Perry, professional psychic channel, seer, spirituality, and manifestation teacher. And I guess this week we'll add opinionated yapper to the multidimensional list of realities and dimensions that I simultaneously inhabit. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome if you are a new listener. This is going to get pretty intense today. I don't know if this is probably where I would start with this podcast, but maybe you are up for something really deep and controversial and something that might light a fire inside of you. Maybe inside of you, might also light a fire under your ass. So we're gonna be going to some pretty controversial places in the 3D reality today, and I am going to be bringing it back to fifth dimension, karma, paths here on Earth, what is going on this planet. And if you are a listener and you have very strong convictions about your political beliefs, I cannot guarantee you any form of comfort during this episode. We are going to be talking about politics. We are going to be talking about political figures, albeit we are going to be talking about them in code names because I don't need that algorithm tracking me around. And we're going to be talking about them in code names. So maybe you don't figure out what the code names are and you're like, wow, that's really interesting. I just have no idea who she's talking about. And I think that would be very, very impossible unless you pay absolutely zero attention to anything that has happened in the United States over the last 8 days. And if you are a new listener, this is not my preferred topic. If I could erase this from my mind and talk about literally anything else today, I absolutely would. This is an incredibly challenging topic for me to bring into this community, but it is completely relevant to ascension right now. The energies that you are feeling, whether you're feeling elated or whether you're feeling like it's the end of the world, however you are feeling is a part of ascension. I'm going to talk about both ends of the spectrum and what's actually happening and alchemizing in the middle. So this is going to be a tough conversation. I just want to put that parameter right now. I'm going to put some other parameters as well. And I really am hoping that once I get it all out and honor my own convictions and honor my own passions and my own soul missions, what I am here to do, that is undoubtedly different than what each one of you guys are here to do. Although for some, we find an overlap, we find a resonance. But not all of our soul missions are exactly the same. My soul missions, I am very aware of what they are. I understand them and I am actively honoring them so that I can complete them and move on to whatever is next for me. And my hope is that if I get it all out, that I will not have to come back to this topic, at least not for a while. This is not what I love to think about on this planet. This is not the energies that I like to play in. In fact, I have gone through over the past 7-8 days this total resistance to having to get involved in these energies and this absolute clear knowing that unfortunately my soul missions are now overlapping with human politics. I mean, it was like a big fuck me moment. And the truth is, because I have not had to deal with many of these topics since I left Orion 6. And yes, we're going to be talking about some of the galactic wars. We're going to be talking about galactic history. We're going to be talking about some of the galactic energies that are coming from certain political figures. And I haven't had to deal with this in so long that I was really like, I really went to my spirit team. I went to the Arcturian council and I was like, no. I do not want to deal with this in this incarnation. And I kid you not, my spirit team sent me this message. It's literally written on a note. It was given to me written on a note while I was telling them all of the reasons why I don't want to do this, don't want to be involved. Maybe it's time to take me to another planet. Maybe we're done here. And literally this message came to me and it says so obvious. It says, don't give up. The beginning is always the hardest. They were basically like, you signed up for this. Like, the game is already being played. And so I'm in. I'm in all the way in. And some days it has felt like I am in over my head. But let's go ahead and start with beginning of November energies. Many of you, as early as mid-October, were feeling that there was seismic shifting in the collective fields in your own lives, as if a lot of things were ending abruptly, and you were suddenly on a new path, suddenly on a new path, suddenly on a new path, and then looking around and saying, I don't recognize where the hell I am, because I thought I was manifesting something different. I thought I was going in a different direction, and then everything suddenly changed around me, and now I'm somewhere else. And I don't know yet if this is a good place to be, or if this is not a place that I want to be. There have been dualistic realities, such as feeling completely hopeful, feeling completely happy, feeling blissful, combined with paralyzing fear, depression, thoughts of I don't want to be here anymore. And I mean, this was no joke. Out of all of the years that I've been doing this ascension work and talking about it and teaching about it, this was absolutely the biggest timeline shift that I have ever been a part of. And as I continue talking to you guys in my different social media platforms, you guys are telling me from wherever you are in the world what it is that you're experiencing. And I certainly don't want to be one of those extremely egotistical Americans that think everything is about the United States. I certainly have tried over the past, I'm almost at 5 years of my ascension. I've certainly tried to ignore it as much as I possibly could. However, as many people from other countries have pointed out on social media, things that happen here in our politics in this country do affect the rest of the world. And so why is that? And why might you feel some resentment towards that? Only 60% of my audience is based here in the United States, and I would wager that many of them actually immigrated from other countries or are from immigrant families. And there can be absolutely this sense of resentment towards the ego American-centric, conglomeration, honestly, that we've become. So why might you feel some of that resentment towards it and what they're doing over there somehow has to affect me, and I'm all the way on the other side of the planet, and I really wish that they wouldn't drag me around through their drama. And the reason for that is because of Atlantis. It is because most of the Atlanteans that came back to this planet, whether they left or whether they went to other parts of the planet, had different experiences, those who came back and agreed to assist with ascension, there was a huge Atlantean karmic load that needed to be dealt with. And so the primary places where that's being dealt with is unfortunately in North America and the Middle East. And so you can see this very direct parallel between where the Atlanteans migrated when their continent was disposed of, was returned to Gaia, and new continents were gifted, where it was a place that they could start over, the beings who decided to stay here. And so those Atlanteans did procreate with the humanoid beings who would later become the Gaian, and who is now the dominant species of this planet. I really cannot emphasize enough how important it is to understand species DNA and how much DNA encoding has gone into the body that you're inside and how many different species are part of it. If you can start to grasp that, if you can start to understand all of these different species that have, and in the word would honestly be tampered with, right? Changed. Sometimes we use the word upgraded if it's something that we like that's happening to it. And if it's something that we don't like happening to it, we tend to use the word tampered with. So that is all opinion, but the DNA is a collective of many different species, and so we have all of that active inside of us, including the Atlantean DNA. These were Pleiadians. These were divine masculine Pleiadians. Maybe I should use the term high masculine Pleiadians, which are quite rare in the Pleiades. They are predominantly a divine feminine species, but that's not to say that they don't have masculine beings. Many of you may have even met one of your spiritual guides who's a masculine Pleiadian being. And so these species came here to this planet. I have a whole episode on it where I talk with Alicia about Lemuria and Atlantis in depth. And so if you are curious to get that foundation before listening to this, I highly recommend it. But we can see this parallel between where we are having a lot of conflict on the planet, and now we are having conflict and issues here in the United States, which I'm very thankful are non-violent at this time, but we see these issues and the karma trying to transmute itself. And my hope is that if you can listen to this, if you can see past my own personal opinions and biases, that you can learn something that helps you on your own journey, helps you to transmute your own energy, and helps you to live a more truthful and aligned life in integrity. And integrity is what the Atlanteans did not have. And that is why their civilization fell. There was a falseness to their energy, a facade, and there was shadow that they were unwilling to look at that brought about the fall of their civilization and them being done on this planet. We cannot avoid the shadow. This is so important because right now what we're seeing, especially here in the United States, is many people who are unwilling to look at the shadow and face it and own their shit, own their complacency, own where they have been complicit in negative energies. And we do that because we don't want to be uncomfortable. That's just the truth. We don't want to be uncomfortable. We don't want to do shadow work that has to do with a global level or even a national level or has to do with our society. We can be extremely narcissistic even in the spiritual community where many people tout shadow work, but then they look away from these bigger shadows because they don't want to be involved in that shadow, that part of themselves. If you're here on this planet, you're a part of the global shadow. And I will just own my own resistance, as I stated at the beginning, to this part of the shadow. And me going to my guides and saying, no, fuck no, please, let me go to another planet. Let me reassign myself. And they were like, no, you're going to have a great time, really. And we are. But it is going to be nothing like the comfortable, complacent, unaware, good time that maybe some of us thought we were going to have, that we were not going to have to do any of this heavy lifting and that we could remain lightweights. So I guess the first place that I want to start is on a topic that many of you were very interested when I started popping off on social media about the current U.S. politics and the situation here. And I started talking about different forms of government, and many of you were extremely surprised to learn that not all species operate under a democracy. In fact, democracy is almost completely unique to the Pleiadians. They are the ones that operate their species under a democracy, meaning that everyone gets a vote. They have their own Bill of Rights. If someone wants to speak up and dissent about something, then everyone is going to listen to them from beginning to end. Doesn't mean they're going to act on it, but that person is given their space and their voice. If someone has a new idea, then they are allowed to bring that forward and present it to the collective. And they operate from a majority vote. They do not have individual leaders the way that many countries on Earth now have a prime minister, a president, some sort of figurehead. They will have a group council, and within that council, each one will have their own significant and different role. So there is a very clear definition about what each individual's role is and what their own individual assignments are. Now, this is not the way that most councils operate. Most councils are so in tune with each other. They're at such a perfect level of resonance that you almost can't tell one being apart from the other beings, even though they have different oversouls. But we're going to talk about those councils, which are at a deeper density of consciousness typically, in just a moment. I want to go back to Orion and talk about, in the fall of Orion, actually, I guess I should say before they fell, the distortion that came into their realities was the single figurehead leader, the dominant leader, and that was an influence directly from the draconian forces. The draconian forces are service to self, typically like 90% of their forces. There is a smaller branch that has managed to kind of break off and follow a path of service to others and transmute their energy. But for the most part in their forces, they are service to self, which means they have to have a single figurehead that absorbs all of the power over those who are underneath them. That is how they gain polarity and continue moving through the densities of consciousness, at least through 4th and 5th density. They can't move into 6th density as a service to self being, but that's how they move into those deeper levels of consciousness, exploring all of the ways that you can have power and control over others. And if it sounds like Mordor, then that is exactly what it's like. And there are beings in this universe that's just their preferred path of existence. So they began to infiltrate and influence as early as Orion 1, and that's why it's called Orion 1, even though there are many other planets in the Orion system that had self-aware life forms on them that went through 3rd density. Not all of them had this type of influence and went through what we call the fall. And so they had this influence, and they started out with single figureheads. You and I would use the word king, right? And they were always who is the strongest, who is the most loud, who is the biggest. That is going to be the most dominant person that is going to take over and become the leader, whether anyone else likes it or not. So we had all these variations through Orion 1 through 6 that were autocracies, authoritarianism, totalitarianism, fascism, basically any path that led back to one single figure controlling as many people as they possibly could, exerting their will over others, which we know is a violation of free will. Now, the Pleiadians started working with these Orion planets very early. They joined the Lyrans, who were already there and who were like, who were fucking pissed. We call them the descendants of the Lyrans, and really they were souls that had maybe never even seen some of the original Lyran planets. Maybe they had been just introduced to self-awareness around the fall of Vega, and those Lyrans were there and attempting to influence the species on these Orion planets to have things like councils, to have shared power. to honor free will, to see the people that lived inside of their kingdoms and borders as citizens that could help create and help build something better than what had been there before, other than just lording over everyone. So we see this evolution from Orion 1 all the way through 6, where it's kind of this tug and pull between something that you and I might call like democracy, people having a voice, people having a vote, there being some form of Senate. Many of you might be familiar with Star Wars and how there was a Galactic Senate. That's coming straight from Orion 6, where the Lyrans and Pleiadians were able to finally have that kind of influence, that there was something like a Senate created. And these senators, like our own, are representative of certain groups of people and were meant to serve those groups of people. And so the Lyrans and Pleiadians tried to influence them to stop seeing their position as I am the authority over you, and to start reversing that to I am here to serve you. And of course, during this push and pull across millions of years and 6 different planets, there were many, many wars. There were so many wars. All of my memory I arrived on Orion 3, probably about midway through the galactic wars in the Orion system. All of my memories are of war, 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 war. There was never peace on any of those planets. Yes, you could go find some far-reaching island out in the middle of nowhere and try to live in peace, but that didn't mean that there was peace on the planet. And eventually, each planet went through what we call the fall, but basically this is a little bit different than the fall that I've talked about, the fall through consciousness. These planets were eventually abandoned. There were no longer groups of self-aware souls that were like, we have something to learn here. It was like you were born into slavery and you were enslaved for your entire life. And some souls were just not able to continue growing in their own evolution when every lifetime you're born into is just slavery over and over and over again. No one's making any progress through their consciousness. They're just becoming more and more traumatized. So over time, all of the self-aware souls that would have created the inhabitants of the planet said, fuck that, I'm not going there. And they started incarnating other places. And when enough of them had left, that's what we call the official fall. And so those planets are not inhabited by self-aware species anymore. And because of the negative energy that was cultivated there, the resources were sucked dry and the planets were eventually abandoned. Any of the draconian forces that came through would take whatever it is that was left and then they would leave and abandon it. And sometimes the planet itself would fight back. We saw that on Orion 4, that the planet was like, I'm not allowing you guys to just kill each other and have constant war here. I'm just going to wipe all of you out and be on my own business, and you can go find a different planet to play out this insanity. And that is absolutely the call of the planet if they want to host the species and the kind of energy and the kind of stories that are going to play out there. Now, there were 2 groups from the Orion system that were particularly, I'm going to use the word rowdy, that were just particularly obnoxious, would not stop with the infighting, would not stop with the instigating, and they were relocated. I wonder if any of you guys can guess the 2 planets that I'm going to name right now. Maldek and Mars. So they were relocated, and that started as early as Orion 4, that spiritual guides were like, we have this group of just particularly super high karma, acting out all the time, not growing their consciousness. And sometimes the planet itself would be like, you're not welcome back here. Yeah, that can actually happen. And so they were kicked out. They were put in timeout, and they were taken to Maldek. And the story of Maldek is really quite sad. This planet, it never achieved the kind of technology that we have here, but they did, or I guess I should say the kind of society that we have here. Not everything about human society is all that bad. There's a lot of richness here. But because it was mostly just this group of obnoxious kids, what they ended up doing was very similar to what they had done in Orion, except they did not have the negative influence of the draconian forces. And so they were kind of left to their own devices on these two other planets. And so in Maldek, they really just created war machine after war machine and eventually destroyed the entire planet through what you and I would call nuclear weapons. And same thing with Mars. They were never really able to get to a very rich, vibrant society. There was very, very few divine feminine souls that wanted to incarnate there. I mean, they had a problem. They had a serious problem because females did not like the experience that they were having there and would often tap out and say, no way, I'm going to a different planet. Like, that is just too, it was so violent and horrible and horrific for females on that planet. I think a lot of females that may have come from or had experiences on Mars are now here and are like, I will not let a male touch me because of the experiences that they had on that planet. So they definitely had different population crises and were also not really evolving, just fighting with each other. This is kind of where that old saying, like, men are from Mars and women are from Venus. And really it's because Mars had too many masculine entities on it. They were humanoid, so masculine humanoid entities on it. And Venus has always been known for having it's just super high population of divine feminine beings. They were seeded by the Hathors, and the Hathors were extremely advanced civilization that came from Theta Reticuli. You may have heard of a Zeta Reticuli, where the Greys are from, but there's actually another star cluster called Theta Reticuli, and that is where the Hathors are from. And they were a Grey-like species, but they leaned very heavily divine feminine, and they learned how to genetically create life forms without masculine entities. It took them a really long time, but they eventually figured out how to do that. They also had interplanetary travel and were able to seed lots of other planets, including the one that you and I know as Venus. And so the Venusians are the descendants of the Hathors, and that's kind of where that saying comes from, that, you know, women are from Venus, men are from Mars. And it's really going back to the galactic issue we had of, like, there were not enough masculine entities on Venus, and so they had to genetically figure out a way to create new life forms without them. And opposite problem on Mars, except they didn't figure out how to make life forms without enough females. And they ended up blowing the whole planet to hell anyway. That planet also was destroyed by what you and I would identify as nuclear weapons. And it's really, really unfortunate because it could have been a very close sister species to Earth and to Gaia. And so we had all of these souls blowing everything to hell. And then, you know, once Mars destroyed itself and the planet was like, I'm not hosting any more life forms, I'm going into healing mode, and that planet is now in healing mode right now. But they had all of these planets, and if you guys have been listening to a lot of my episodes, especially some of the recent ones and the Galactic War ones, then you know some of the higher councils, some of the Elohim, some of the Archangel councils asked Gaia if she would host the final karmic game, and that if she would host it, then they were going to wrap it up as far as this local universe goes. And that's really, really important. This is something I've been wanting to teach you guys for a while, so now is as good a time as any. When I say local universe, I'm talking about a specific star cluster, could be a solar system, and it can be as large as a galaxy. But it is not actually the same as going to a different universe, like a totally different universe. So the term local universe literally means what is local to you. And we know from Orion and the Light Body episodes and the excerpts I read from their book that they're working with 5 local universes where the karmic game is complete and we are the final story. Once we are concluded here and we're wrapping it up, the souls who want to continue, because they cannot force a soul to stop their karmic game. They cannot force a soul to deal with all of their karma in a lifetime. They can't force a soul to choose their path of service to self or service to others. That's all under free will, and souls have to go at their own pace to figure out what it is that they want. So once those souls have exited the incarnation and it's kind of their final run around the block, the ones who want to continue the karmic game will be relocated to a local universe where the karmic game is being played out. As of right now, my spiritual guides have said there are 2 other planets in separate local universes where they are hosting karmic games and allowing incarnations, and some of those souls had incarnations here on Earth, but would not have had an incarnation in the last 100 years. So about 100 years ago is when they kind of started sifting, filtering out, okay, you're very deep in your karmic journey. It doesn't look like you're going to make any decisions anytime soon. It doesn't look like you're concluding anything anytime soon. So we're going to give you a different option of where you can continue this. And if you're worried about your soul family, maybe you have some people on the other side, that's very understandable. That's usually the first concern that people used to have when I would do sessions is, did my grandparents already leave without me? And the answer is no. They will typically wait for the entire soul family. If you guys are going to leave and not continue on Earth, typically wait for a good portion of the soul family to come together and then make a decision as a group. So as many of you know, after the fall of Maldek and of Mars, many of those souls started incarnating here on Earth, and they started arriving about 8,000 years ago. Not very many of them were allowed to come into Lemuria, which was a higher dimensional plane, or allowed to join the Atlanteans. The Atlanteans were quite advanced Pleiadians. They had had a lot of different experiences, whereas many of the Orion souls had really only had Orion and then Mars, Orion and then Maldek. But the Atlanteans had the Pleiades and then the Orions and then Theta Reticuli and then maybe time with the Venusians and then maybe time with the Sirians and then arrived here. And of course, I'm speaking about linear soul progression through consciousness. So something that almost no one talks about is the peace treaty that the Galactic Federation of Light tried to create with the Draconian forces in order to get them to stop fighting. When the Draconians had their first interaction with a little species you might know as the Arcturians, they had this really negative experience. Nobody really won. The Arcturians were very much catalyst into higher dimensional awareness. They started working on their technology a lot. The Arcturians lean more divine masculine. And at that point, when the Draconian forces found them and started to try to have interactions with them, they had not yet come across a divine masculine species, a more divine masculine species in this local universe yet. They had only been, hunting down the Lyrans. They were a divine, very divine feminine species. They'd only been dealing with them. And so they kind of thought that these Arcturian beings, especially because they were much smaller and shorter than the Lyrans, that they were going to be an easy meal. But what the Arcturians had already mastered, because they were late 4th density beings and the Lyrans had been in their earlier to mid 4th density, what they'd already mastered was the ability to leave an incarnation at will, to just immediately drop out of it, drop the body, soul is in the 5th dimension. So when they saw these draconian forces and realized like they're going to try to take over and enslave us, oh hell no, they just dropped right out of their bodies. They are the literal definition of they played dead, and they just left those bodies, went back into the 5th dimension, they regrouped. This ended up being the catalyst for them to shift into 5th density consciousness and also to upgrade all of their technology. And where the Draconians found them was on another planet. It was not here on Earth. They did have an outpost here on Earth that they would later come to meet some of the Draconian forces. But this initial interaction was on a different planet that the Arcturians were trying to seed, trying to build up some sort of community, society, and they dropped out of that, and then they went back to Arcturus, regrouped, created super advanced technology, very advanced ships. These ships can send out mass waves of love light energy, and that is, in these galactic wars in 4th and 5th density, they're not fighting with bullets, they're not fighting with fire, they're not fighting with nuclear power. They are fighting with love light versus fear-based energy, negative energy. And so they had these ships that could broadcast huge amounts of very pristine love light energy, and they were able to drive them back and to drive them out of entire planets and really to push them out of some of the planets where the Arcturians were working. And that moment for the Arcturians of being able to build these kinds of ships, and they do not build this hammer and nail, they literally create it through the power of their mind moving matter. I guess you want to call it telekinesis. That is how they create these ships. And so they were able to create an entire fleet and said, we understand that our mandate, what we are learning about ourselves, our mandate from the Elohim, from those who created us in this universe, is to be the protectors of those who cannot protect themselves. And we will stand up to these draconian forces. We will protect planets that are in 3rd density so that we can honor their free will, and we will do everything that we can to ensure that there is as little interference as possible. At this time that the Arcturians were really coming into their power, their energy, they were overseeing the Stargate that brings souls from the etheric realm into this realm. They are overseeing all of the local Akashic records for this entire galaxy, and starting to oversee the preservation of all of the templates on the garden planets where these DNA packets could be stored so that life could be brought to other planets from all different species. So they really came into themselves. And at this point in the histories, this was when the Lyrans were ascending out of 5th density, and they were like, we have been doing this for so many millions of years. We are done now. We are ascending into 6th density consciousness. We're no longer any kind of physical being. We're in the higher realms. We're happy to be spiritual guides and support for you, but only our descendants are actually going to be having incarnations. Now, this is also something really important to understand about galactic histories and species, is that just like here on Earth, there's new babies born every single day. I'm a human, the baby is also a human, but we're at totally different points in our own life experience. And that's how it is with the species as well. There are new souls that are born every day and that get created for the Arcturians, for the Pleiadians. The Lyrans were at the point where they were like, only our descendants, as in those who incarnate into bodies that hold our Adamic templates, will be able to access the memory of the Lyrans, because no more souls were being created for Lyran planets or for Lyran outpost species. So there was a power shift from the Lyrans trying to protect themselves and trying to also protect, the Pleiades and to help out in the Orion system, to them ascending out and being fully complete in their story, and the Arcturians coming in and saying, okay, we will kind of take up the mantle here and begin assisting. And the Draconian forces were like, wait a minute, your ships are much more powerful than anything we've ever encountered here. And now we're being driven off of these planets that were easy pickings. Something that I personally take a lot of pride in is that the Arcturians are referred to as the shield of humanity. And the word Arcturus itself means bear and guardian. And many people on Earth interpret that to mean guardian of the bear. No. This is the bear guardian, as in if you mess with the cubs, you're going to get the wrath of the mama bear. And I think that this is an important part to understand about my own personal biases, my own personal lens, and where I'm coming from for what I'm about to tell you next, especially as we get into the current era here on Earth. We do see protecting others as our mandate from the higher realms. And it's something that I have always taken very, very seriously. And I do believe that because my soul honors that mandate, that I have a very strong intuition that has never, ever been wrong. I may not have always listened to it, but it has never been wrong, especially about being able to identify those who pose a danger to others who are at a point in consciousness where they may not be aware they are becoming prey. Some of you might really chafe against that and not like that and not want someone looking out for you in that way and feeling like, no, I want to be more independent and I don't need you. That's totally your choice. That is your choice, but it doesn't change my mandate and my energy and the way that it paints my perspective of this world. So if we speed along through time to Earth, we know that they had the Lemurians, they had the Atlantean experiment, they had the fall of Atlantis, lots of karma created. It was a very perfect atmosphere for high karmic beings to come in and further pull down the energy and get to the very bottom, the very most negative energies that Source wanted to explore about themselves. Now, just because this planet was handed over to the human species about 10,000 years ago, but it really kind of took about 2,000 years for things to actually get going, for us to actually, kind of ramp things up around here, build a village, build a city, build something that was worth thinking about later. But just because it was handed over as the dominant species does not mean that there was not interference and that there hasn't always been some form of interference. Just because we don't have aliens landing on the White House lawn and walking around and, hanging out does not mean that they haven't been here, especially when they are invited. And during those early years, especially when we had Ra here, the Venusians, when they came down to hang out with some of their souls who had incarnated as ancient Egyptians that had also been a part of Atlantis. You know, they were buddies. And this is something I've never talked about before. They were buddies, honestly. And that's why they invited them down there. And the Venusians were more advanced. And they were also the spiritual guides of many who had incarnated as ancient Egyptians. And so they were teaching them everything that a spiritual guide would teach. They taught them how to manipulate energy. They taught them different healing techniques. They were trying to teach them how to come into the law of one, how to remember the oneness. But of course, there is a lot of distortion when you're in the lower realms, and that got turned into gods and goddesses, and I really don't like using any of those words. Even though I channel almost all of those ascended masters, I rarely ever use the term god, goddess, because it puts them on a pedestal that they never asked to be on. They don't want to be on that pedestal. The only entities that want to be on a pedestal and have power over you are service to self beings. And those are the ones that try to manipulate you into doing negative things, into hurting others, into taking away the free will of others and lording over people, violating law of free will, etc. But because these really advanced Arcturian ships were now in this part of the galaxy and this part of our solar system and watching over us, they couldn't just come and land and fuck everything up the way that these negative entities used to be able to do in Orion. And so Earth was seen as a place where these Orion souls that had been very deeply traumatized could come live out this final karmic story and hopefully transmute some of this energy. Without these entities taking over in ways that they had done in Orion when the Arcturian forces were not at the level that they are now. The Arcturians arrived in Orion to start helping and assisting during the time of Orion 5 and Orion 6. That is when I first met them, and that is when I felt called to join them. And it's also when I started having some very interesting experimental incarnations into genetically, I don't even know what this would be called, lab created bodies. Yeah, it was a wild time. Orion 6 was crazy. I will have to do that episode eventually if I can stomach talking about all of those things. But bringing it back to Earth, this was seen as a place where we could start having this final show without as much direct interference. That does not mean that these entities have not always tried to interfere telepathically from the comfort of their own ships far, far away. One of the crown jewel manipulation tactics of the Draconian Empire is the creation of what you and I refer to as religion, right? This belief that there are these entities out there that are above us, and if we don't do what they say, they're going to strike us down, and if you're not a good girl, then you're going to go to a bad, bad place when you die. Complete bullshit, absolute bullshit. You don't need any of that in your life. I know for a lot of people, it's how you have your spiritual connection. But for me, maybe it's the Arcturian in me, but I just am so not for religion. And I have the most amazing spiritual connection that I've ever had the day that I left religion behind fully and completely. But that distortion absolutely made its way to this planet. And as we know, religion has been this major catalyst for humanity. It has been this point of, I'm either having this deep spiritual connection and feeling hopeful and feeling good and feeling like there's this being out there that loves me and wants to help me, which is usually you connecting with your higher self and your spiritual guides, or that I want to lord over others and tell them that they're going to a dark, fiery place when they die and that they need to do everything that I say so that I can overtake their free will. There have been many wars started in the name of religion. This is not something new. This is something that played out from Orion 2 which is where they first introduced this kind of manipulation tactic that we call religion, to all the way through 6. A little bit on Mars. It really didn't take when you don't have any kind of polarity with divine feminine, divine masculine, really didn't take. And I think we've seen that in different religions here, that sometimes the ones that are actually perpetuating the religion are the more feminine beings because they have a stronger connection through the womb space and through the third eye into the higher realms. And so they're kind of reinterpreting religion into their spiritual connection. It couldn't really take when they only had masculine beings that wanted to fight on Mars and Maldek. Maldek did manage to get some, different religions going. And again, this is to help you contextualize what is happening on our planet today and why there seems to be this rise of the final stand, I hope it's the final fucking stand of religion and these wars and the karma and the enmity. So let's fast forward then and get to the founding of the United States. Just very briefly, I'll touch on, again, not all governments have been democracies. This is very new for Earth. We had a lot of the government systems, such as kings, emperors, lording over everyone, and a lot of this lineage, whoever was next in the lineage had to be born into the royal family. All of that is to make DNA manipulation extremely easy so that the entities manipulating the bloodline don't have to do any work. I mean, come on, could we make it any more easy for them? But we lived in those days for a long time here, and all of that was very easy to influence on this planet because most of the souls had come from Orion and were already used to that kind of thing. It made complete sense to them that there would be this figurehead that would be the biggest and the strongest and the loudest, and that everyone would hoorah and get behind them and say, yeah, you're our leader and you're going to save us and you are going to fix everything and you're going to make everything better, and I just love you because I just really want someone to help me. And then we had a group of people eventually on this planet. And again, I'm just telling this from the United States perspective. We had a group of people come here to this land and decide to try something new and something different that was under direct influence. Once they got here, it was under direct influence from the Pleiadians, who would often go, I talked about George Washington in my last episode, who would often go to George Washington and some of these other founders of the United States and try to influence them to embrace democracy, to embrace something like a Bill of Rights that comes directly from the Pleiades. They have their own Bill of Rights for their people. To embrace something like a constitution, which is a vow. A vow is very, very powerful. It's like a mandate in the universe. When you say, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to stick to it, and I'm going to honor my word. So things like the Constitution came from that, and the way that we set up our government here, it's very interesting. I know a lot of you guys are international, but if you ever get the chance to study United States government and how it actually runs and actually works, and no, I'm not referring to looking on the news, but actually looking inside of, a government book, if you actually get the chance to study it, it's extremely unique. Very, very unique. And there's all of these stopgaps everywhere to ensure that there isn't a consolidation of power. And that was heavily influenced by the Pleiadians, who had seen the way that the consolidation of power destroyed Orion, Maldek, Mars. This influence in our government is one of the reasons why there is this subconscious resentment towards the United States, especially from other countries. They like to say it's because of, this, that they have this power, they have these nuclear weapons, or they have this big military or whatever, the subconscious level is the Pleiadians interfered, and the entities that want it to be authoritarianism, autocracy, fascism, they see it as a threat to what they are trying to accomplish, which is power over others, which is consolidated power. And they have this resentment towards the Pleiadians for being able to get a foothold into this planet, and for that influence to then start influencing all of these other governments to start embracing ideas that we refer to as democracy. And it has not always been perfect, as we know, in this country or any others who have started to embrace democratic principles and started to give their people a voice and started to protect the rights of their people. I mean, this is revolutionary, completely revolutionary, that the power would be in the people's hands for all of these souls coming from Orion who have never experienced a lifetime where they were in their power. And what I see today in my own country is this absolute fear of it. And many, many entities saying, you don't need that power, give it to me. I know what's best. I can be in charge of you. I can lead you. I am the one that's going to help you. And you can go back to just not thinking about it, ignoring it, the comforts of your own subconscious mind. And I do also want to mention, because this is something that I was teaching you guys on my stories over the last week, is that democracy is not the only way. The Arcturians do not have a democracy. They operate from totally different system, but you also have to remember that most of them are mid-4th density to late 5th density beings. None of them are 3rd density anymore, unless they're like me and they incarnate into a 3rd density different body than the Arcturians themselves. So their government system, or way that they prefer to govern themselves, is that they have many councils and they have elders, and they run a series of tests that have to do with skill, energy, purity of energy, and how suited one is to a particular role. And if you pass those tests, then you may be given that role. That role may be offered to you, and then it's your free will choice to take it. And you can volunteer for certain roles that you would prefer to have within the society and go through the testing system for them. If they are looking for people to fill certain roles, they may approach you and say, I think you might pass this test to take on this role. And if someone has been in a role for a long time or any amount of time, and they say, I want to try something else, I want to do other tests for other roles, then that's their free will choice. And so while they honor free will, there's no voting, there's no popular vote. There is this very deep culture of we work together for the highest and greatest good of all. And that's how our society and species survive. There's a very, very deep loyalty in Arcturians to Arcturians and to Arcturus and to the species as a whole. If you want to kind of understand that more, you can look at Japan and Japanese culture. Very different than anything else we have on this planet. They are very loyal. They are very respectful. They do not have as high a crime as many other major countries and cities in the world. I remember after the tsunami, there were all of these stories about people finding wallets and jewelry and, things that had value and were expensive, and them going on a whole quest to get it back to the person that it belongs to, instead of them stealing and taking it for themselves. And even if you look back at their history, a lot of Japanese culture is about honor, and sometimes going to extreme measures and ending their own incarnation, falling on their own samurai sword if they had dishonored in any way. I mean, it's definitely an Arcturian culture with a 3D human spin that I don't know the Arcturians would necessarily actively promote or endorse, but the influence was there when they created that outpost and started incarnating a large amount of Arcturians into the area that we know as Japan. The other interesting thing about Japan is that these really big religions never really took a foothold there. It never really became their, part of their national identity the way that Christianity or Catholicism is a part of the national identity of many, many countries, especially countries that had very high Orion incarnations. They were always very open to the idea of energy and karma, but not so much to some of these other Western religions. So bringing it back over to the United States and how they were founded and the Pleiadian influence, which by the Pleiadians were seen as a success considering the level of awareness, the level of consciousness that these humans that they were trying to work with were operating at. And so I think that's really important to remember. The Pleiadians are not saying they did everything exactly the way that we would do it. They're really like, for where you're at, you're making some good progress. Now, if y'all could stop enslaving each other, that would actually be even better. Slavery was a huge 911 for the Pleiadians, and they worked very diligently and still are working on it even now. And still, even one of my contracts in this lifetime is to help women free their minds from some of the enslavement and indoctrination of misogyny in a patriarchal society and them being subservient, female being subservient to male instead of equal. Different, but equal, which has been a very challenging concept to try to bring to this planet. And every day I get pushback on it, every single day, especially those who benefit from the opposite and feel threatened by it. And I understand it's just the immature masculine in many of us. And misogyny is something that is in the collective on a cellular level. It's in the DNA, the subservience. And it really does take a lot of awareness to transmute that on the cellular level and to clear that. And that mission is also something that really colors the way that I feel about the United States and the government and the society here, and really any of the societies that I interact with on this planet, but especially in my own backyard, because that's always where we start our work first. So this country has gone through a lot of different change and has never ever, and I don't think will ever be anything near perfect. I think that eventually most of the countries on this planet will cease to exist. This planet will be left to the gardeners. Many of these souls will relocate. They will leave, and Gaia will reclaim most of her land, and those who are left here are referred to generally as the Galactic gardeners, and those are the souls that desire to work on a garden planet. That was always the intention. I think I've used the analogy before of like, this is a library and we're having a brawl inside of the library. It's like Fight Club inside of the library. Eventually Fight Club leaves and the library continues. So I do want to talk about this group that has been elected here in the United States over the last week. And I want to talk about some of the galactic history that might be driving their energy and their actions, and why you might be attracted to them and why you might be repelled by them. I think it's important to start understanding them on an equal level instead of they are entities that have power over me, and I am completely helpless, and, they will always have the power and I will always be powerless. That is the old world that we're getting out of. That is the old world that many of you are transmuting right now inside of your body, inside of your mind, inside of your DNA. And we are being challenged right now on this planet through this experience, especially those of us here in the United States that feel some type of way about this group who is going to run this country. So I am going to use code names. Codename Orange and codename Spaceship. If I feel called to talk about any other entities that are involved in this, then I will do that in the future, and I'll figure out how to come up with code names. But that's what I want to use. I don't want to use their given name for energetic and algorithmic purposes. So Orange comes from Orion. I remember Orange very, very well in Orion, and they are really a conglomeration energy. This is exactly what my spirit guides told me, because Orange and I don't get along. And I really believe it's the Arcturian in me that wants to stand up and protect especially marginalized people and women. And I see Orange as a direct threat to those groups and communities and to those people. And so my mandate is really rearing up inside of me, and always has whenever I come into any information regarding Orange. Maybe you love Orange. Maybe you were friends with Orange in Orion. Maybe Orange was supposed to be this leader in Orion that was going to save people and set people free. What I remember about them in Orion was that they were a general several times. One of my significant incarnations on Orion 5, they were a very big general, similar energy to what they have now. Very loud, big energy, outspoken, kind of exuded, this domineering masculine energy and this mentality of I cannot be defeated. And we're gonna do this together, right? And we're gonna win, and it's gonna be so great. And there were times on Orion when we would win, or when whatever side you thought was good would win. And then the other side would rise again, and that's just the nature of working inside of a dualistic reality. Because of the power that Orange was able to accumulate in some of these Orion lifetimes, they were definitely and absolutely, and I believe still in this lifetime right now, courted by what you might call the dark side, right? The path of service to self. I do not believe, in my professional psychic opinion, that they have made a decision for their soul about whether or not they are going to follow path of service to self or path of service to others. Typically, a soul will go through a lot of these lifetimes where they go really, really far on either end, and then they make their decision. What some of the other galactic historians and Akashic record readers have picked up, especially ones that really resonate with Orange and really love Orange, is that they had experience with the Pleiadians. And that is true. They have had experience with the Pleiadians. They have tried to balance out their energy from Orion by linking up with the Pleiadians, by trying to have some Pleiadian lifetimes. Some of them are past present, some of them are future present. So they're kind of trying to balance out their energy, and you can kind of see how they're courted by one side in a lifetime where they gain and accumulate a lot of power, and where maybe the Pleiadian influence hasn't really been able to gain a foothold. And then maybe in another lifetime where the Pleiadians are able to gain a lot of foothold, then they might swing a little bit more towards Pleiadian ideals and values. What I think one of my main chafing points with Orange is that Orange has not had any female lifetimes in any species. Their past parallel Pleiadian lifetimes were divine masculine inside of a divine feminine society, but not divine feminine. And so if you've never had any female experiences, I mean, that's why I've been a female on this planet for 13,000 years, was because my guides were like, you need to know what it's like to be the oppressed. You need to know what it's like to be powerless. You need to know what it's like to be on the other side, because I had had all of these lifetimes in Orion of being a divine masculine or being a masculine being and using power in many different ways, sometimes for the good of all and sometimes just for the good of myself, and not really understanding what it's like to be the ones who do not benefit from war, who get no glory from war, who get trod over, who get diminished, who get used, who get enslaved, who get violated. And that's something you can only learn by incarnating directly in the body and having those experiences. So I think that some males who have had only male lifetimes really struggle with finding any kind of empathy towards women and towards the experiences that we have, towards the lack of safety, towards the desire to have a protector and a provider, and the way that it can be very traumatizing to have that protector or provider abandon or abuse or emotionally abandon and check out during the lifetime. I think they can try to empathize, but I think it's really challenging for them. And we see that a lot in the collective. You know, I'm out there on social media all the time, and I see a lot of callousness from males towards females, towards marginalized groups of people, people who are different, especially people of color, the LGBTQIA plus community, anyone who's expressing differently than this very masculine Orion energy, you know, the soldier's energy, the very blunt energy, the black and white energy, no nuance. And where there's no nuance, there can be no depth. And where there's no depth, there can be no empathy. And where there is no empathy, consciousness cannot move forward. So it gets stagnant. And you come to stalemates, like we did on many other planets. I'm not a very big fan of orange, and that's really pissed a lot of people off, especially people inside of the spiritual wellness community that see orange as their savior. I don't need a savior. I don't need a savior. I don't need a hero. I don't need a main character. I am all of those things for myself. And I came here as someone, as a soul who's already chosen to be service to others. I came here to help others, not to consolidate power for myself, not to be the loudest and take up the most space and take up the most control in order to force others to do what I want them to do. It is a violation of free will. And I understand that many of Orange's supporters feel that their free will is being infringed upon, but at the root of most of those discomforts is just their own desire to actually infringe upon the free will of others. I had this conversation with someone today, and I think I'll have to dedicate a whole episode to the incarnation process, but I was teaching them how to understand when and where a woman's free will is violated by being forced to give birth. And it is a very nuanced conversation, and it does require an understanding of the incarnation process. This is something that my spirit guides had to walk me through, and I had a lot of questions about this process because obviously I love humanity. I wouldn't be here 13,000 years if I didn't love them and want to see them prosper, want to see them shine. And I would love to be out of business and never have to coach another woman who has grown up traumatized in her own home by parents who could not meet their needs. I would love for every family and every parent to be able to meet all of the needs of their children. So there's a lot of nuance inside of these conversations, but at the end of the day, the most talked about topic in the galactic councils is free will. Free will, free will, free will. Where has there been a violation? What action would be a violation? How can we preserve their free will? Your free will does not give you license to hurt other people. That's a violation of their free will. And I know when it comes to babies, it's a really nuanced topic, so I'll probably save that for a different episode because I would love to explain to everyone the incarnation process and the different nuances and different stages of what actually happens when a soul is incarnating on this planet. But just because someone is different than you, that does not mean that part of your free will is to diminish them, to kick them out, to force them to change. If someone is expressing themselves in a way that is different than you, and you don't like it, but they're not actually harming you or diminishing your free will in any way, then your desire to force them to change to please you is a direct violation of their free will. And I think that a lot of what Orange preaches is, I want free will for this select group of people that agree with me and not for this group of people that do not agree with me. And in my professional galactic opinion, thousands of years on multiple planets watching this shit over and over, that is a very spiritually immature perspective and dangerous rhetoric that violates the free will of many. That is not democracy. That is not equality. And you ain't gonna catch me out here on this planet supporting that kind of energy. It would be in direct conflict with the missions that I came here to help and support humanity with. So the other entity that I want to talk about is Spaceship. Spaceship is not technically elected into anything, but Spaceship has inserted themselves into this government. And this is very, very interesting to me because I've been watching Spaceship for a long time. I watch a lot of these different world leader characters, and I tap into whatever is on the surface of their Akashics, whatever's kind of free information in there, tapping into that and seeing what will come through. If you know what you're looking for, you already know. I mean, the patterns in this universe are mostly all the same. So Spaceship, what's interesting is that they were also in Orion, and I remember them quite well. And Spaceship comes from the Greys. And I have not talked a lot about the Greys. I feel neutral about them. They're very much a 50-50. You never know when you meet a Grey. Like, are they leaning more towards service to self? Are they leaning more towards service to others? You never know. They're not anything like the Draconians, where it's like, I am already bracing myself for a service to self, but you might, in the 1 in a million off chance, be a service to others. And I have a lot of compassion for the Greys. So the Greys are from a group of stars called Zeta Reticuli. And some people call them the Zeta Greys. And what happened is that their species started kind of evolving, and they are related to the Hathors, but the Greys were very much this like divine, this like masculine species. And I think things could have turned out differently if the Hathors had embraced the Zeta Reticuli Greys and come together and created their own species, but that didn't happen. So the Zeta Greys, they ended up going through their own evolution, and when they got into fourth density, they started to have interplanetary travel, which is common in fourth density, and then they started to do a lot of genetic modifications. There's so many places where this came from. Some of it was being displeased about the way that they looked. Some of it was wanting to have different different experiences, looking in a different appearance, wanting to look a different way. Some of it was long life. Some of it was dealing with some of the sicknesses and illnesses that their people would get. And so there was a lot of DNA tampering. And what ended up happening is that their people started to get very sick, and they started to kind of die out, and they didn't know how to, like, their species was going to die out. And I know every galactic historian, Akashic record reader taps into a different aspect of this story. So I'm just kind of giving you the high level so we can actually get to talking about Spaceship and what their motivations are. But, you know, the Greys were at a point where it was very critical for their species. They were kind of on the brink of dying out, but they had interplanetary travel. And so they went out and they tried to find help. And what they found on their journey was they found the Orion system, and no one would help them. And then they ended up finding the Draconian forces. And the Draconians are always willing to make a deal with absolutely anyone. They will promise you the whole world, and they will give you an apple. But the Greys were very desperate. Like, they needed, like, this was a serious issue for them. And it's an issue that, you know, a lot of different councils were talking about. And so they met up with the Draconian forces, and a group of them, this is important, not all of them, a group of them met up with the Draconian forces and said, like, can you help us? And they said, oh yes, of course we can help you. Come here. And what we want you to do for us is we want you to go and spy on these different people and go to these different planets and do these errands for us. And in return, like, we're going to help you with these DNA upgrades. The Draconian forces had quite advanced technology. Remember, this is what they tempted the Lyrans with initially, and why the Lyrans opened the door and allowed them in the first place. So this group of Greys started working with the Draconian forces in Orion, and sometimes the things that they would do were not very nice, because the people of Orion, the primary dominant species on those planets, were third density beings. And so they're seeing ships come and go, you know, the same way that we have like these UFO sightings. Very confusing. And then the Draconians were like, well, you can just experiment on like some of these people. And so then they started experimenting, started helping the Draconian forces. And a lot of us who were in Orion at that time, we started to get a bad attitude about the Greys. And we started to feel negatively towards them, like they were betraying us, like they were handing us over to the Draconian forces, like they were selfish and only in it for themselves and only in it basically to save their own skin, and that they didn't really care what happened to us on those planets as a direct result of their interference. So if you're someone who feels very negatively towards, you know, gray alien beings, maybe you've had nightmares about them coming to like get you in the middle of the night, most of that is going to be past parallel memories from Orion. And somewhere in their desire for different DNA that could help their people was this rabid desire to get Pleiadian DNA. They saw the Pleiadians and they were like, you look so healthy, so vibrant, so alive. You guys don't have sicknesses or illnesses. Like, your energy is so pristine. And mind you, these are the Adamic templates that the human is based on. And so they wanted this DNA, and so it kind of became this push-pull between the Greys trying to get Pleiadian DNA and saying that's really what we want, the Pleiadians saying, no, these are our sacred templates, we don't want to give them to you. And this went on for a long time, and this followed all the way to Earth, because the Greys are very factious. they break off into different factions, different groups. They all have different desires, different agendas. Some of them really wanted to be to mix with the Pleiadian DNA. Some of them wanted to stay very true to who they are. Some of them mixed with other Orion species DNA. I mean, it was just like all over the place. And so a lot of us just have our own unique feeling about the Greys. Mine tends to be fairly neutral, especially with what I know about them. But I do remember them causing trouble in Orion for sure. And as we know, they eventually came to Earth and were able to get the kind of DNA and do the kind of tampering that they wanted to. And they were able to create a new species called the Essassani. And the Essassani, the most famous Essassani, probably the only one that we know on Earth, is named Bashar. And Bashar channels through Darryl Anka. And Bashar has been an amazing luminary of so many different truths, but they definitely have gray energy in them. And they're very open about how their species is a hybrid of human DNA and gray DNA. And some people who really did not want that, maybe you were a part of the group of Pleiadians that initially told them, no, we're not going to give you this DNA, you might feel really negatively about that, and you might just have, in general, negative feelings towards Bashar, or even towards Spaceship. So bringing it back to 2024 on Earth, Spaceship has a lot of gray energy. That's where their soul is from. That is part of their history. And that's also what drives a lot of their behavior in this lifetime. They're very open about their belief that Earth is going to die and we all need to relocate to Mars. That belief tells me right away, I don't even need to look in the records, that they had negative experiences on other planets where the planet itself essentially kicked them off. They interpreted that as the planet is dead, we've sucked all of the resources dry, and we need to migrate and go somewhere else. That's most likely what happened to those early gray planets in Zeta Reticuli. And it's most likely what their catalyst was for them to create interplanetary travel. We don't evolve without these catalysts. And so now they're very into, on this planet, getting humans into interplanetary travel, getting them onto Mars. This planet is going to die. They're very into technology and they want to put neural chips in, and they're always kind of looking to be ahead of the curve in the next thing. That's a very gray energy, and it's also kind of the grasping that I believe got them into the position in the first place of their species almost dying out due to too much tampering. It's like you need to slow down and think things out before just grasping at everything and anything. And we see that very clearly with their varied experiences, their varied business ventures, all of the different pots that they have their hands in. And the other thing that's very interesting about Spaceship is their pronatalism. I don't know if you guys have ever even heard that word before, but the pronatalism, which is something that Orange and Spaceship both share a desire for, and it really comes from a galactic history of being on planets where the species was potentially going to be extinct. Pronatalism means that they believe that every woman should have as many babies as possible, that we should be trying to populate, that one of women's primary functions is to have children, and some of them even believe that we should select the best ones and, make that one have 5, 6, 7 kids. Maybe they wouldn't state their beliefs that way, but that's just kind of what it is. They don't believe that there should be these families out there that don't have children. They don't believe that women have a right to choose if they want to have children, that it's part of their biologic destiny to be popping out babies. And that any who don't believe that or fall in line with their beliefs should probably be, filtered out of the gene pool. I mean, these guys are giving me a goddamn headache. So we see it very clearly in their own lives. Each one of them has had children with 3 different women and multiple children. I think that it's kind of a secret how many children Spaceship has, but if you dig around online, because they don't really tell people anymore how many they have, it was like 5 was like the Google answer, but then if you dig around, it's actually like 11. And they bought, this big, the word they use is a compound. I don't think it's a compound because they are a billionaire. I think it's probably a group of really beautiful mansions for these women and these children to live on, so that Spaceship can just walk to each house when he wants to visit his different children. And then just to cover Orange really quick, Orange has had 3 different partners and 5 children. So something that can be a driving factor for this kind of behavior is, again, coming from a species and having a galactic history where your species died out and now you feel like these are my beliefs about this species. Earth is not in any danger of humans dying out. I mean, there's 8 billion of us, and eventually there will only be a few because this planet needs to go back to being the garden planet once it's done with this fucking Fight Club. But I think the kind of dangerous rhetoric around that is the idea of selecting these pristine women to have children with, and this subconscious desire to procreate with them and to kind of spread their seed around. Maybe you don't share that same belief with me, and that's totally your opinion, but that's something that I definitely, drew back to. If this person understood, if a Spaceship understood what parts of their galactic history were driving their behavior today and how it's not really fucking relevant on this planet, and we don't need to jump ship and go to Mars, then would we even be in this situation? Because there's a lot of people, clearly over half my country, who are still operating on a lot of these Orion beliefs, on a lot of this I need a savior, on we need to get out of here and go to space, man. We need to put neural links in our brain. We need to spread our seed around so that we don't die out. This is something that I always ask my clients when they have this subconscious belief that doesn't actually match reality. I always ask them, where's the evidence of that in your reality? And as I'm looking around at 8 billion people, I don't see evidence that we're dying out. Especially as someone who believes that it's a woman's choice if she wants to have children. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with anyone who does not want to have children. Not everyone came into this lifetime with contracts to have children. Especially as we continue going through ascension, it's absolutely normal that there's going to be a drop in population as the karmic souls leave and go to other planets where they can continue playing the karmic game. There's far fewer people on this planet that actually want to stay long term and become galactic gardeners. So when someone who has these beliefs and these drives within them that doesn't actually match the reality around us, that again is a very dangerous cocktail to a bunch of people being forced, coerced, or indoctrinated into doing things that don't actually align with their own highest truth. And that's why I always keep my little third eye on Spaceship and whatever the hell he's up to. I'm not very happy or impressed with what he's up to right now inside of the United States government. But I do know to trust that karma always has the final say. So with that, I want to shift out of talking about these two individuals, and I want to start talking about what my spirit guides said about what's going on, because a lot of us felt like we went through this very big timeline shift, and many of us felt like this is not my preferred timeline. This, like, something has gone wrong. we were trying to go to the future, and we actually went to the past. And yet at the same time, many of you were reporting to me And myself is included in this. I was also feeling this. And many of the women online that I have connected with over the last week that I did not previously know have said that they feel that there's a major shift that has happened in the collective. They feel this sense of something is coming. They not necessarily if it's good or bad, but definitely the something is coming. Something is going to be revealed to the collective. And that this timeline divergence is going to merge again with a more desirable timeline for everyone. We don't know when it's going to happen, but I definitely feel that sense of anticipation within my own energy. And a lot of us felt that there was this sense of peace and calm, almost this like good feeling, while at the same time, a lot of us, I'll include myself in this group, maybe you weren't in this group, were disappointed over the last week, and these two different realities existing at one time. And it was just the most strange sensation that I have ever had during this awakening and ascension work. What my spirit team told me, and this is coming from the Arcturian 9D Council aboard the Lightbringer, is you guys are in a volley effect. So what is a volley effect? Because they were quite delighted. And they are in the opinion that like everything is great. This is going to be a great catalyst for ascension, for the evolution of your species, for your own journey of consciousness. And this is how the volley effect works. So you have this group of people who are saying that these are my values. This is what's important to me. I'm just going to use the United States example, right? So we had about 75 million say, I love orange. Orange is important to me. Orange has the values that align with me. And then you had about 70 million people who said the opposite, who said that that doesn't align with me and those are not my values. My team said orange is the conglomeration of the collective shadow of your people. That's why they inhabit all of these qualities simultaneously, and they are serving this lifetime out to be a catalyst for this collective that has their awareness on them. Those who embrace them as they are right now are inside the shadow, which means that that's the point in consciousness that they're inhabiting. Those of you who are not inside of the shadow and see the shadow are the mirror that will be held up in order to shine the light inside of the shadow and bring all of that group into transmutation. And the imagery that they used for me was, you know how you can have a couple of mirrors and one of them is pointed at the sun and then it points light at another mirror and it bounces off another? That's like the imagery that they used. The group inside of the collective that does not embrace that shadow and that sees the shadow as shadow instead of the place in which they inhabit, instead of the identification of themselves, through our descent, through our dialogue, through us speaking up, through us having conversations, through us feeling this fire lit inside of us to be more active, to be activists, to have a stronger online presence. I think I talked to you guys about this on my Instagram. I grew one of my social media platforms times 10 in the last 7 days. I literally went from 300 followers to 3,500 followers in 7 days just by speaking out my truth on these different topics that have to do with our nation and having dialogue with others on this perspective. So essentially, the side who is going to assist with transmuting this shadow is creating this vortex of energy, this vortex of light, and that light is getting shined into the shadow, and then all who are inside of the shadow get to transmute within it. And so we all help each other, and we're helping essentially the global self. And it's important to note that they see this as very good for everyone. But of course, they're a ninth dimensional council, so they don't experience judgment at all. They don't judge orange the way that I do in my 3D self. They don't judge orange. They don't judge spaceship. They don't judge this other part of the collective. They're just thinking, wow, this is such a great recipe. Like, one side is going to interact with the other side, and then everybody will have this transmutation. It doesn't mean we're all going to believe the same things. It means that our collective society is going to move forward in consciousness. That is not the same as having identical political and societal beliefs. But when you look at orange, I see that very clearly. I'm like, okay, it makes sense that all of their behaviors that I do not agree with, but that before my spiritual awakening, before all of my spiritual learning, I did agree with them. I was raised in a conservative, fundamentalist family that has supported the right wing here in the United States their entire lives. They would never even dream of changing or evolving into something else. I hope they do, but it's definitely not on their bingo card. And the truth is, I used to agree with all of that. I used to believe all of that. And I really believed that that was like the best way for everyone. And they would always teach, free enterprise and a free market. And all of that was just it was just aligned with who I was back then. But I've gone through my own evolutions and my own understandings. And I've come to a place of realizing that supporting people in their free will to be exactly who they are, protecting marginalized people, and if I pay taxes and money towards something, it sure as hell better go towards people who have less than I do, not towards people who already have massive wealth, who are just accumulating more and more and more for themselves out of a low masculine frequency of scarcity. That's not true wealth. And that's why these groups or these individuals who accumulate wealth in a negative way from scarcity, they almost always go through these bankruptcies and all of these financial issues. We have several people here in the United States just of this week and this month and during this time are having to auction off everything that they own and all of their money going towards people as reparations. And that really is the karmic loop closing on getting wealth from a place of scarcity and greed and low vibration, as opposed to from a frequency of true wealth and true abundance and true prosperity, which means that there's enough for absolutely everyone on this planet and in this entire universe, because infinity is the nature of the one infinite creator. So my views and opinions have changed, and I know what I'm here to do. And I also acknowledge and understand that I'm not really accepted by either side here in American politics. Okay, the side that I most closely align with on values and where I actually put my 3D vote, they're not really into the alien stuff, okay? They're like, what? I don't know about that. A very, very small group of them are even into, the spirituality side or the psychic stuff. And this galactic history, I mean, we're talking about, I'm part of an extremely niche group of people, but I know who the fuck I am. And I'm going to continue being that self, and I'm going to continue leading with authenticity and awareness and awareness and awareness and awareness. Now, with that being said, I do want to point out two last things. Number one, several of you reached out to me and said that you feel a fire energy in your field, and this is Kali Ma. That is what the energy is called. Kali space Ma. Now, sometimes Kali Ma is referred to as, a goddess energy, whatever. It's the energy of a volcano. The energy that powers a volcano is its own thread in the universe. It is fire energy, and it has the ability to transmute through fire. This Kali Ma energy is the same energy that I channel when I'm working with the Great Dragon Mothers. And just a heads up, the Great Dragon Mothers are the 6th and 7th density consciousness of the Draconians. the dragons. Because in 6th density and 7th density, they have to make the quantum leap to the light, to the path of service to others. So while I don't work with any draconians at this time who are, pure draconians, aside from the DNA that we all have inside of this body, aside from that, I really don't work with any, 4th, 5th density, not going to touch them. But 6th density, 7th density, some of the most amazing entities to work with because of that transmutation energy. And that energy is a product of the quantum leap that they make from the path of service to service to self to service to others. It's the energy of a volcano. And if you think of a volcano exploding, it is terrifying. It is all of this destruction. But it's that planet saying, I no more. Like, this is my fire energy. We're just going to destroy everything and start over. We're going to clear the path. And that is what this Kali Ma energy is trying to do inside of you if you are feeling it. It is about convictions. It is about truth. It is about your passions, following your passions every single day, speaking your truth, living with conviction, being authentic, and not backing down just because there's another fierce energy inside of the room with you. This is the very fierce, fiery, feminine, fed up, not going to take any more shit energy. But the distinction of Kali Ma energy and just being pissed off is the frequency. There's a huge frequency difference. Kali Ma frequency is in a higher frequency. It's like, I called you out because I love you. I said this because I know that you can do better. I'm speaking on this topic because I'm raising awareness. A volcano is not afraid to be seen. It's a very different energy than just like a raging alcoholic energy or any of those other lower frequency fire energies. And this is just how we transmute. This is one of the ways to transmute negative energy into positive energy, lower frequency energy into higher frequency energy. And no matter where you're at with your own beliefs, your own journey and consciousness, that is what we signed up for. That is what we are here to do. All right, so the last figure that I want to talk about in all of this is the opposition. The other person who was running for presidency here in the United States. And I'm going to use codename Lotus. That is one of the meanings of their names. And this is some of what I picked up inside of their galactic history. They are a descendant of the Lyrans, and that makes absolute, complete, perfect sense considering that they're mixed race in this lifetime is coming from Africa and then India. And these are the two places where the descendants of the Lyrans decided to put forth their own seeding, if you will, and decided to start having small colonies incarnate and build up those societies with souls who were descendants from the Lyrans. If you look at Hindu and Vedic culture, Sanskrit, this all came from Vega, which was one of the main stars, kind of the final star, final planet of the Lyrans before they were forced to leave and escape the Draconian Empire. If you look in Hinduism, many of their gods, goddesses have blue skin, which is very unique here on Earth. And that is because on Vega, they actually had blue skin. And I believe it was due to something either in their atmosphere or in their food, something that they ate a lot of that ended up turning their skin blue, because that was not the case on some of the other Lyran planets. Only a very old soul would choose to incarnate on Earth as a marginalized woman, as a person of color female, because that is one of the most vulnerable types of entities that you can be in this reality. And absolutely, without a doubt, one of the most challenging soul missions that you can sign up for. So what I saw in their soul history was a descendant of the Lyrans, had worked in Orion, mostly on ships, not having a lot of ground experience with the Orions and incarnating inside of some of those bodies that we had there. They were mostly working on ships, overseeing and working as a spiritual guide to those who were on the ground. And they wanted to keep their frequency pretty pristine. But I think that that is one of the reasons why people perceive them to have a, quote, lack of experience, end quote, because if you look at the facts in this reality, they don't actually have a lack of experience. I think what people are picking up on is they have a lack of experience being inside a fight club, like most of us have been on the ground in the nitty gritty and getting all, chewed up by these lower frequencies in Orion. And because they chose not to do that, I think the subconscious collective was kind of rejecting that part of them. Even though I personally would take a leader who has more experience in the higher frequencies, higher dimensions, has a more calm demeanor about them any day over the chaos of Orion. But I guess we're gonna learn by experience, which is pretty typical Orion fashion. I've never had so many flashbacks to Orion than I have in the last 7 days. And sometimes it actually makes me nauseous because when you get really into some of these negative frequencies, some of this war energy, this othering energy, it just implodes very quickly. And we saw that on Maldek. We saw that on Mars. It's a different game here on Earth. There is a lot more feminine energy on Earth than there ever was on Maldek and Mars. But bringing it back to Lotus, she was on those ships and working with the Pleiadians, and then followed those ships here to Earth, had a few observational lifetimes observing what was going on, and then had a few on the ground once they saw that there were a lot more souls willing to incarnate on Earth because Gaia is a divine feminine planet. There was a lot more souls willing to have female incarnations here, and saw the Earth as a protector of the feminine. And that's really how women got into herbalism and what a lot of people call witchcraft, which is really just like natural, living naturally and seeing that the Earth provides everything that we need and has all of the medicines to heal us. And so a lot of souls that had been really traumatized by the harsh masculine energy, especially on Mars, places where it was really, really bad for anyone who incarnated in a female body, they would almost always kind of become that witch in the wood, living on their own, living off grid, and, making tinctures and other natural things as a means of surviving. And they kind of got this stigmatism about them that, they're the old crone or the old maid. Really, like, those souls have seen things that you cannot even imagine in your worst nightmare. And they really grounded a lot of this divine feminine energy on the planet that we so desperately needed in order to balance this out so that it wouldn't turn into another Mars Maldek situation. So anyways, she had some of these incarnations. Her masculine incarnations are quite far behind her, and that would have been in the very early years when the Lyrans were on the run, and she would have been incarnating as a masculine Lyran and having dealt with the draconian forces. It just none of the pattern really surprises me of those choices to stay on the ship, to not get back into the fray, and to keep evolving their consciousness that way. They bring a very calm energy, and I think when you have a lot of Orion energy that can be very kinetic, very warrior-based, that a lot of people just don't see that as strength. And most of humanity has a very, very narrow definition of strength that can almost always be, I'm just rolling my eyes, can almost always be traced back to Orion. And sometimes I'm just like, God damn, are we going to be telling the same story again? Like, are we not sick of this fucking story? I know I'm sick as hell of it. I told my spirit team this week, I am not getting involved in any wars here. If there is a war here, I am out of here. And I will be on vacation planet, and I will be taking a rest in the etheric realm. You can call me when you've got something more calm on the docket. I ain't going into it. And, they just laugh because they love my fire energy. They love my sass, but they also already know how everything's going to turn out. And I do believe that things are going to turn out for the highest good of all. I do not believe that it's going to turn out in the peaceful path that I imagined and wanted. I am still going to work every day to manifest that for Earth. But just like the Arcturians were teaching us on the previous episode, you have groups of people that come together and create realities. And if a group comes together and their reality is stronger, then that's what ripples through the collective. And unfortunately, this current reality is just not what I would personally manifest for myself. I would have chosen something much more peaceful and fifth dimensional, honestly, something that had a lot less Orion energy in it. But sometimes the volcanoes just gotta fucking explode. So here we go. Again. I don't think there's anything else I really want to say about Lotus other than I see them leaving Earth, rejoining up with the Pleiadians, probably living out the rest of their ascension with the Pleiadians. And so my guides showed me that there was a very clear choice that this particular country could have taken. One was much more, peaceful, not as aggressive, and the other one is much more aggressive. And the people have spoken or whatever. I'll keep that to myself. Somebody spoke and decided what they wanted. And so that's just the path that we're on. And if you listen to this episode and you hate me now and you can't believe it, yada, 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 I will always be biased towards fulfilling my soul missions. And I know what I'm here to do. And I see all of the different pathways to get it done, and I'm choosing what is right for me. And it is your responsibility and your ability to do that for yourself. And also, if you really did not like this episode, whatever you do, do not look at my Instagram or my threads because you will probably explode. I think the words that one woman used, and she commented on something, she said, "You are lighting them up." And I was like, fuck, okay, I guess I have to, channel this Arcturian warrior and all of that Orion energy back into this current transmutation, which is something I never wanted to do. I never wanted to do it. But this is the timeline, and I've got to show up for it. I've got to fulfill the mission. I've got to keep going. I'm going to do my damnedest. Not everyone is going to like it, and that's okay. If somehow you did like this episode, then please share it with a friend. That would be absolutely amazing. That is how this podcast has grown, completely organically. Everyone who needs to find this information is finding it at exactly the right time for them, for as long as I'm allowed to put out this kind of information. So drink it up and share it with others who might also be interested. And you already know that I will see you on the next one.